Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group for this Wednesday, October 8th, 2025. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte, North Carolina. We got Sam Walker out on the Outer Banks, and down in Columbia, South Carolina, the reliable Frank Strait here as always. Coming up on this episode of the Carolina Weather Group, we're going to take you back inside NOAA's NCEI. That's the nation's or the world's premier weather and climate archive right here in Asheville, North Carolina. We introduced you to them during a Hurricane Helene special, and now we're going to show you some of the amazing things that are inside their archive. That's coming up in the second half hour of our program. But we're going to start with the coastal storm, the nor'easter that is developing off the Carolinas, and will be bringing impacts both to the South Carolina and North Carolina coast. Let's start with South Carolina. Frank Strait's here tonight to tell us what we can expect. Frank?
Well, let's talk about the timeline for the storm and how things are going to come together. By the way, over my shoulder there, that's Tropical Storm Jerry. I'll talk about him in a minute or two here. But first, let's go to the screen share and look at a satellite picture, loop of satellite pictures, actually, showing our fruited plain with some clouds and a band along the we're just off the northeast coast and trailing into the southeast. That's associated with a cold front that's pushing in. You'll also notice a little mass of clouds here over the plain states. That's an upper level disturbance that will be pushing into the southeast, and that will be what spawns our coastal storm. There's another disturbance up here over western Canada that will join forces with it later in the week to keep it sitting up over or near the northeastern part of the country and causing a nasty storm. They would call it a nor'easter up there. So that's going to be how things come together. Let's take a look at it on the computer models, and we'll look at the everybody's favorite model, the Euro, which does not show any storm on the playing field right now. It's not actually until Thursday night into Friday when this starts to come together. There we go, and we're actually looking at Friday night here with low pressure forming over the northern Bahamas. North of that, we're looking at the colors you see here depict wind speeds rather than precipitation this time, showing that for a reason. Look at all of these easterly winds and some fairly gusty winds too. We're seeing winds in the this is nautical miles per hour up into the 30s, which means your wind speeds will be up into the 40s probably in our coastal waters here in South Carolina around that time. Friday night into Saturday, the winds start to shift northward in North Carolina and increase as the storm gets stronger and starts to lash Sam's territory up there at the Outer Banks. The last thing they need, and Sam will tell you all about that in a minute. From there, after Saturday afternoon and evening, the storm very slowly shifts northward, taking those strong winds with it. The winds shift offshore and continue to blow hard up there. So the seas are going to be pretty turbulent, and the coastal waters are going to be rather angry here this weekend. Now, the bad news for us here in South Carolina, well, it's mostly good news. The storm's staying mostly offshore. It doesn't really get its act together all that well until it gets up north of us and into Sam's territory in North Carolina and points north from there. But there are some issues. We're going to get, for example, some rain along the South Carolina coastal plain from this storm. But that's largely welcome because a lot of us are in a moderate drought right now, or at least in the less serious abnormally dry category on the drought monitor. So whatever rain we can get's a good thing. It may come a little bit too hard and too fast, resulting in some localized flooding issues. But for the most part, the rain's going to be beneficial. Gusty winds will probably not be a serious problem for us. We'll see some gusts in the 30 to 35 mile an hour range, maybe even 40 or so, depending upon the exact track of the storm. The closer it gets to the coastline, the stronger those winds might be for us here in South Carolina. But for the most part, the winds are not going to be a great concern. Something that is going to be a concern is coastal flooding at high tide. Because, well, we just had a full moon. We're hours past the full moon right now. So the astronomical tides are running high. As a matter of fact, it's a king tide situation. So we have the elevated astronomical tides plus those winds backing it back up to Friday evening here. This is actually midday Friday. A lot of long easterly fetch here pushing Atlantic waters into our coast. at the same time as those high astronomical tides are occurring. Kind of looking at, back that up a notch there to the midday hours here. That's right about the time of high tide we're looking at here on Friday. And that's why the high tide is going to result in some pretty high water levels. It's going to get into the major flooding category around Charleston to tomorrow, Thursday, at the roughly 10 a.m. high tide. But going ahead to Friday, that's when the highest water should occur along the South Carolina coast. And the Charleston Harbor tide gauge forecast has it going up to 8.5 feet, which is actually a pretty high tide there. That would be in the top 20 range there. So that's pretty high, and that's going to cause some significant flooding around high tide. If you're in the Charleston area, you can expect to see some roads flooded and closed due to this, and some areas that often don't flood could flood in this situation. In addition, there's going to be the pounding surf going on because we have a storm brewing out there and intensifying and churning up the Atlantic waters. So there's going to be swells coming ashore, and that's going to probably result in some beach erosion and some overwash in addition to the high tide flooding. So that's what we've got going on. Things start to settle down as we go into Saturday. The winds turn offshore. The astronomical tides are coming down a hair starting Saturday and gradually go down from there. So things improve Saturday and continue improving as we go through the rest of the weekend in South Carolina. But overall, it looks like here in South Carolina, we're going to dodge a bullet, unlike Eastern North Carolina. And Sam's going to tell you all about that right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, Frank, we are going to take a 1-2 hit out of this situation. The cold front already crossing over us as we speak tonight, and will make its way offshore. And behind that, we're already starting to see the gusty northeasterly north winds, and all that's going to do is start building that surf on the surface, and we'll start seeing waves by tomorrow morning, probably in the 5 to 6 foot range, and then they'll rapidly increase into the 8 to 10 foot range. And then throw in the fact that we'll get the coastal storm, so we'll start getting all that onshore flow on Saturday and into Sunday. And it's just going to compound an already disastrous situation, especially in the village of Buxton, just north of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. That's where all the focus has been around the country and around the world with this system, is because we've had houses falling in the ocean. If you were with us last week, you saw quite a bit of footage that we collected over roughly a 72-hour period just from that event alone. We go back to Hurricane Erin in August, which already started to cause issues in Buxton with the rapid erosion. And things have just gotten worse because we've been in an onshore flow here on the Outer Banks pretty much consistently since the beginning of August. And that has just eroded a lot of the beach sand away, a lot of the sand that's in the tidal zone and even in the sand just offshore. And that sand is what helps protect us when we get events like this. And unfortunately, in spots like Rodanthe, on northern Hatteras Island, Buxton, the north end of Ocracoke, those are the three major hot spots that are really the focus of the last couple of events. And that's going to continue because there's just no sand out there now, and it's all been eroded away. And you throw in these coastal storms like we get from here right on through the winter and into spring. So it's just the latest in a series of what we expect. Hopefully this is the last one, but we know that's probably not the case. What's been going on in Buxton since we last talked? Well, we've seen one more house fell on Friday. The total came out to 9 last week that collapsed, and all of that debris continued to just slosh around the surf zone, scattered up to almost 18 miles of beach along Hatteras Island alone, not counting what continued to drift south and on past Cape Point and out into the open Atlantic with that northeast flow we were dealing with all last week. That debris pretty much stayed, though, in the surf zone. And the National Park Service, despite the government shutdown, over 40 members of their teams here from the 3 national parks have been out just about every day picking up things on their beaches. The homeowners have hired private contractors to help move that debris as well. And a lot of volunteer organizations here on the Outer Banks, and just those of us who love the beach, whether they're from all over the country or lived here entire lives, have been out there throwing boards in the back of the pickup truck when we've been out on the beach. Massive piles of debris in one neighborhood alone along what's called Old Lighthouse Road. That's the main street that goes into the neighborhood where all those houses in Buxton collapsed last week. Dare County went to its debris contractor that they normally use when we get hurricanes. and called them in, budgeted $200,000 to have them start picking up debris today because of this next situation that we're getting ready to deal with. And for the most part, they did a good job of getting those debris piles picked up. Still some out there. They'll be out tomorrow, but they're really trying to do as much as they can before this next storm, because we know we're going to get the overwash. So trying to get all that debris out of there at the same time, hopefully not dealing with a major situation, but it sure looks like it. It's interesting to note, Dare County Emergency Management Director Drew Pearson put out a statement last night. He reiterated that just a couple of hours ago. They're asking folks who are here visiting to consider leaving early because of the situation we're looking at. And they're telling people who are coming in on the back end of the holiday weekend, this is a very popular time for our homeowners, very popular, a lot of events that have been postponed already here on the Outer Banks. But these telling people, if you've got travel plans to come to the Outer Banks on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, you may want to consider delaying those plans just because the travel issues are going to happen. Hatteras Island and Ocracoke, south of Oregon Inlet. Those folks north of Oregon Inlet, Nags Head, Kitty Hawk, Kidulbo Hills, on up Duck, Southern Shores, Corolla, not as much of a problem. It's going to be windy. It's going to be rainy. The beach is not going to be fun to be on. Might see a little bit of overwash there. If you have to go up to, say, Corova and Swan Beach, which is right in the northeast corner of North Carolina, that's a 4-wheel drive. You have to drive on the beach to get there. It will be hazardous at high tide the next couple of days, right on into early next week. But for the folks on Hatteras and Ocracoke, that's going to be the main focus out of this. Hopefully we don't lose Highway 12 in some spots. This situation that we're dealing with here is just the beginning. It looks like our third situation, I should say, since August, with Aaron, another coastal storm that developed after that, and then this last blow we just had. So it's going to be rough for the next couple of days out here in the Outer Banks. Hopefully we get a little bit of that rain that you talked about, Frank. We need it up here just as much as you guys do in South Carolina because of the drought they've been dealing with. And we were talking offline earlier today about it. We also have to consider, what does Jerry do? Because if Jerry were to strengthen any more, it's just going to compound the situation with that long period swell over the weekend.
Yeah, that's right. We're watching Jerry out there, which unfortunately is kind of under our little text here, but the little blob of clouds that you see here, which, there we go, east of the Lesser Antilles, there's the Windward Islands down here, the Leeward Islands up here, and there's Puerto Rico. A little hard to see the outlines, but there they are. Jerry's just east of there, and Jerry is struggling. The reason being is because there's vertical shear caused by strong upper-level westerly winds that have helped keep Jerry in check here today and last night. So Jerry's still a tropical storm and is struggling to gain strength out here. Now, the Hurricane Center's forecast, there it is, found it, calls for it to kind of sideswipe the northern Leeward Islands over toward the Virgin Islands, where there are tropical storm watches, or rather warnings, in effect, but staying to the northeast of there, at least the center staying northeast. Eventually, conditions should become more favorable for it to become a hurricane, but it looks like that vertical shear and those upper-level unfavorable winds are going to continue as it turns northward. Now, it looks like Jerry's going to stay a long way away from us here in the Carolinas, curving northward and ending up passing east of Bermuda. However, because it's out there and a hurricane, it's going to generate some swells as it churns up the ocean waters, and the swells radiate out in every direction, including toward us. So we'll have some of those swells coming our way. Now, how much that's going to matter to us is going to depend on how strong Jerry gets. Currently, Jerry's forecast to reach Category 1 hurricane intensity, and if that's the case, then the swells probably won't be all that bad. There certainly will be some, and that'll result in the surf being a little rough and some rip current risk, but potentially nothing more serious than that. But if Jerry were to get stronger than forecast, especially if it gets into the higher end Category 2 range, as it was forecast a day or two ago, then we would potentially see those swells be bigger, more robust, and have a longer period, that being the amount of time between the crest of each swell wave. If that were the case, they'd be more energetic and potentially cause more problems in terms of beach erosion and rough surf and rip current risk and hazardous marine conditions along our coast. So that's what we'll be watching. But right now, the trends have been good. It looks like Jerry will not have any direct impacts. And if things go the way the forecast is calling for right now, then the swells that we have to deal with won't be all that serious. So time to go on to James and talk about what we have for the main event tonight.
Yeah, we're going to get to the main event in just a second, but Jay's watching live with us on YouTube here tonight, Frank, and I thought you might be able to quickly answer his question. With regards to the coastal storm for this weekend, we keep referring to it as a nor'easter. What is a nor'easter?
Well, a nor'easter is one of those terms. Until I moved up to Pennsylvania, I'd never even heard that term. So down here, we don't use it as often, but in New England, it's very commonly used to describe a storm like what we're going to get. It just simply means it's a storm that is causing very strong winds out of the northeast. That causes problems for us along the East Coast if you have those strong northeast winds, because you get the rough pounding surf, you get water piling up along the coast, which results in coastal flooding, which is exacerbated by high astronomical tides like when that's going on, like we're having right now. So that's really all it is just a coastal storm that's causing strong northeasterly winds.
And because we don't name them, that's another reason we use nor'easter. I know our friends at the Weather Channel do like to apply names to winter storms now. But yeah, we call them nor'easters out here on the Outer Banks as well. And that's, it's a term that moved down from New England to here because we don't name them. This will be called the Columbus Day storm. I mean, that's flat out what's going to probably be called for us. We'll just reference it in the future as a Columbus Day storm. We usually have to reference them off the calendar because we don't put names on them because they're non-tropical low pressure systems. So yeah, nor'easter is a common term out here as well.
Yeah, and it's also important to note because it's not getting a name, it's not a tropical system. You won't see things like tropical storm warnings issued for this, but the National Weather Service has already issued some other products, some other alerts, such as coastal flood warnings, coastal flood watches, associated with what will still be true impacts from that storm. So Frank and Sam, thank you for that explanation. Speaking of storms that never quite made landfall, but still had an impact on the Carolinas, it's the anniversary of Hurricane Matthew, which brought impacts, rough surf, gusty winds to the Carolinas in 2016, 9 years ago. This is some of video that Tim Buckley shot in Nags Head, and you can just see what was the situation 9 years ago. Looks eerily similar to what we might see this weekend. All right.
Yeah, just without the rain. I would say without the rain, we did get a lot of flooding rains. I actually think that might be down on the southeast coast. I'm not sure that I haven't seen a pier that looks like that in the Outer Banks, but anyway, I
could be mistaken.
That's okay. But yeah, we did take quite a bit of rain from Matthew because if you remember, Matthew coincided with, I believe, a pretty strong cold front that came across, and there was a lot of rain with that, flooding rains, in fact, that flooded much of between the highways, as we call it here on the Outer Banks. There was 5 inches of rain in, about a 4-hour period in Nags Head. Came out to like 12 inches total by the time the storm was done. And between the highways, it's basically sitting in a trench, and that water collected. We had 2 and 3 feet of rainwater that flooded business. That's, usually when you talk about overwash out here, we don't talk about rain as much when we get tropical systems. This was a rain event for the Outer Banks that caused quite a bit of flooding all up and down the northern beaches of Kitty Hawk, Nags Head, and Killable Hills.
And you are correct. That video that we are seeing is not from out your way, but I just double checked my notes, and it's actually from Oak Island. So my apologies.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Now we
don't build our piers like that. That's why I knew. I was like, I know that's not one of ours. So.
All right. So as these guys mentioned, our main show tonight, our main behind the scenes that we're going to take you into is NOAA's NCEI. That's the National Center for Environmental Information. It's based in Asheville, North Carolina. We told you their Helene story, and you'll hear a little bit more of it coming up when we did our Hurricane Helene 1-year anniversary special just a few weeks ago here on the Carolina Weather Group. So you can check that out in your feeds if you haven't already. And some of you maybe have already seen this interview because you're already supporting us on Patreon and YouTube memberships. If you are, you know that you've got early access to this interview, but we're going to bring it to the rest of the world now and take you inside this incredible weather and climate archive that is right here in the Carolinas. It was truly remarkable to get to go inside there. We appreciate them taking time out. I took a lot of their time. I appreciate them taking time out to show me around, to show you around, and we're going to take you there in just a moment right after this message. We need to talk about Queensboro. When you're building your brand, every detail matters, including what you wear. Queensboro Shirt Company makes it easy with easy ordering, free logo setup, and no hidden fees. For more than 40 years, they've helped people and businesses share who they are with the world with their quality embroidery and print. It's all about honest pricing, small business friendly, and genuine care. Plus, their no returns necessary guarantee means that you can try them absolutely risk-free. Go to queensboro.com to see for yourself why they're the top-rated custom logo apparel company on the internet. And you can scan the QR code on your screen right now or click the link in the description to check out the new Carolina Weather Group merch store powered by Wilmington-based Queensboro. You can support the show and support our local Carolina economy when you check out the Carolina Weather Group merch store for hats, shirts, and more.
I'm Jason Cooper. I'm the archivist at the National Centers for Environmental Information here in Asheville, North Carolina.
Where are we? What is this? What does it serve?
Sure. You're at the NCEI archives here in Asheville, North Carolina. We are the official archives for NOAA. We also host environmental data records and data from other federal agencies across the government, and foreign weather observations and climate observations as appropriate to fill out the global climate record. There are other repositories for other line offices like Fisheries and the National Ocean Service, but we are the primary archives for NOAA.
What's on these shelves behind us?
Behind us, we're looking at over 36,000 boxes of environmental data records dating from the 1830s up until the late 2010s. So the records that we have both in paper and microfilm and electronic formats form the basis for environmental research across the globe. We have incidences of hurricane landfalls, we have flood records, we have solar storm records. This is not just a weather and climate archives. We have oceanographic and geophysical data, so we have evidence of solar storms. We have evidence of carbon levels in the atmosphere, earthquake reports. So it really does run the gamut of environmental information.
Who created these records?
The records mostly were created either by U.S. federal civilians or military personnel. We're also an archive for military environmental records from primarily the Army and Navy, so from their land bases and also the ships that take weather observations as they ply the oceans. We get requests to archive other voluntary observations, like say your grandparents took records on their farm and they would like to submit them upon their passing. Maybe they're found in the records of the family, and we have to make decisions on whether to accept those records. If they have information about the instrumentation, that's great. If they have information about the exposure, in other words, where were the records, where were the observations taken, that information makes the information, the observational information, even more valuable. We also take into account how close those records were taken to an official station. If they were a block down from a co-op station, it might not be as applicable or as valuable as if they were in a location that was somewhat isolated.
So in terms of your job, this isn't just a place where the past lives. You're still actively documenting and ingesting that stuff.
While we're not getting many new observations in paper format anymore, the digital archives, the digital portion of NCEI's archive, also located in this building, ingest digital data from the Cooperative Observer Network, which has now gone entirely digital. as well as digital observations from the Weather Service, the DoD, and other partners who transmit data to us. Most of our customers would much prefer the records that they are interested in to be available in digital formats, and that's part of my job, to identify collections that should be prioritized for scanning and availability. And I do that using two different factors. One is customer demand. What are folks asking for that we continually have to go down to this room to scan and make available? If we could just do entire collections and make them available for self-service, we will have done a service to the customer. And the second is risk of loss. Some of these papers are, as I mentioned, a couple of centuries old. We have information on microfilm and on tissue paper, on formats that are just more prone to loss. So that's part of the equation as well when we decide what needs to make that transition from paper to digital.
Who are the customers that are asking for data from this room?
Most of the historical data that we serve from this room are for researchers and historians. Our more current data has a little bit different customer base. Those are insurance agents, attorneys, folks that are looking for to do adjustments to insurance rates, looking to represent their clients in cases where weather was a factor in whatever situation in which they're representing their clientele. We also have customers from the energy and transportation industries wondering where they should locate their next transit route or their next wind farm or solar installation, those types of things. So the transportation and energy sectors are significant clients of more recent information and also of long-term records. In our archives in the basement, our physical archives, we have about 40,000 boxes of paper materials. So those are publications, documentation, and observations. And then next door, we have about 120,000 reels of microfilm that contain other collections. So the oldest records we have on paper are from the 1830s, taken from Charleston, South Carolina, actually happens to be our oldest record. From microfilm formats, we actually have records from the National Archives. We have copies of those records from the Founding Fathers back in the mid-1700s. So Ben Franklin, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson were notorious weather observers. We have those records as well. Unfortunately for us, the originals belong to the National Archives. They get all the really cool stuff. Historically speaking, the most interest, I think, has come from observations of the weather that happened during significant events in particularly American history. We've got records from across the globe, but primarily US based. And we made a decision to maintain and really showcase some of those records for which historical events happened that had a weather component, if you will. The first one that I'll showcase is the records from the US Army during their landfall on Iwo Jima in World War II. And you can see these are dirt and dust covered because they were on the island as the U.S. was establishing control of Iwo Jima in March of 1945. And there's a look at the very first observations from March 11th. The note on top shows when each instrument was installed. You can see they got the rain gauge installed on the 26th of April. The ceiling light, which is a beam of light that points up to measure the ceiling of the clouds, was installed on the 27th. So we have all that information, and then the observations came. And you can see about the first month or so. The very first page is quite dirty because it's always been on top. But as you look back further, you get an idea of what these look like. Looking at a particular flood that occurred in the Ohio Basin in 1912, and this is a publication of the original charts. And either fortunately or unfortunately, the spine had degraded on this one. It's unfortunate because it's not in perfect or mint condition, but it's fortunate in that those records are very easy to scan now that they've kind of broken apart from the bindings.
I see what you mean.
And then even more unique is some of these hand-printed documents that they've managed to get their hands on that definitely didn't exist down here. This is special records from the Weather Department, Fleet Weather, the DoD Weather Department from 1945. maybe it's a good time to show you an example of what we have from the this record in particular is a good example of what you'd find from the 1880s. This is a record from Fort Sisseton, which was in the Dakota Territory before North and South Dakota were split. So this record would show a good example of, number one, the size of the paper tended to be larger. And if you could put your hands on it, it's much thicker. It's very high quality paper. But I think what you mentioned was the handwriting. And you can see it's much more of a script-oriented handwriting where the sevens and the zeros and other characters have a little bit of, I guess we'll call it flair to them. And that, I guess you can see that in the records in this room, that tended to disappear. Another thing that tended to disappear was the existence of comments, where folks would make notes about other things that were going on, such as visitors to their town, the notations of fall foliage and crop harvests and other things that might even give us a clue as to what was going on in that season. Those tended to disappear as the decades went on in favor of just this hard data, right, a value in a cell that we so largely see nowadays. The station name's in the upper left. It's Fort Sisseton, Sisseton, in the Dakota Territory, which in 1886, the Dakota Territory existed as part of the American frontier before the split of North and South Dakota.
So in 1886, what tools would they have been using to make these observations?
Nothing digital, I'll say that. They had a mercury barometer, they had aneroid barometer as well. The thermometers generally were mercury and glass. Wind vanes were much more the way you'd see them on historical barns, right, where you'd have the traditional four-pronged north, south, east, west, and then the rain gauges were typically made of metal and 4 inches in diameter and standardized.
And I know you have another item that you've set aside.
Yes, absolutely. This is the first ever observation of the weather taken from the South Pole. You can see the station name is a Mudson Scott. And the date is 1957. So the U.S. set up a joint base at the South Pole and began taking weather records almost immediately. And you can see that first record here from January 9th, which is almost the first day of, no, it's actually just into summer, right, at the South Pole in 1957. And you can see the observations are written somewhat in code. You've got a time, you've got your ceiling height, and the pluses mean that it's overcast there. But again, just 3 obs here. It looks like they've taken obs at 1500, 1800, and 2100. This to me represents both human history and weather history. So this one kind of has a double importance. Number one, it's the first weather observation ever taken at the South Pole in human history. The second is that the observers at the South Pole had to overcome a problem that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. You can take a temperature observation. It's usually very cold. The pressure is very low because they're on an ice cap. There isn't a lot of precipitation. All of those measurements are taken, somewhat the same as they would anywhere else on Earth. The one problem that they had at the South Pole was wind direction. They got down to the South Pole and figured that everywhere was north. So how do you make that scientifically relevant? What you can see again on the very first image is that someone came back on the lower part of the image and drew a wind vane. They decided right then and there that a north wind would be coming from the prime meridian, or 0 degrees. And then it followed from there that the international date line, or 180 degrees, would be a south wind. Again, air quotes are needed because there's no such thing as something coming from the south to the South Pole. So this one just holds a lot of interest from a weather observing perspective.
And you said some of the other records that exist here would be from events like...
But yeah, Woodstock and Hindenburg. And another interesting one was the records from Mount St. Helens for 1980. It was analogous to the South Pole records in that it resulted in confusion amongst the meteorologists who didn't know how to report falling ash. It had just never been done in Weather Bureau or Weather Service history. So they started writing out the word ash. And then this was 1980, so they were keying this into a computer as well. And the computer was spitting out, I don't know what to do with ASH, because S was snow, H is haze. And I don't know that A was a code for anything, but you can see on the forms they had scratched out the word ash and wrote D for dust. And that seemed like a good thing because dust, it obscures, because they were reporting visibility issues, and it obscures visibility. But the problem is that when they started sticking their snow ruler, snow stick down into the dust to measure the dust, it broke the computer again because you can't measure dust depth. So now there's a code in the Weather Service manual for ash.
And you might have records from a place like an office that no longer exists, say like National Weather Service office in Charlotte, which moved out in 80s, 90s.
That is correct. And even Asheville had an office, and when they consolidated to one location, when ASOS came around in the 90s, and there was no need to man the weather station at Charlotte Douglas anymore. So these big bound things, these are our daily weather maps collection. So these are maps that were produced by the Weather Service every day since the 1880s, and they're still doing that. So we have daily weather maps from yesterday in the archive upstairs.
They're just not bound and printed.
They don't look like this. That's correct. You could see the shape that some of these have gotten into, and the spine of this actually. These are 1903. So this would be 1900 to 1903. That stack there.
Is this a book that if somebody was looking for something from inside of it could even be opened up, or would it just fall apart?
Hopefully not.
Okay.
I do have gloves
Yeah.
that do a couple of things. They keep my oils off the paper, but they also keep any like fingernails or anything that maybe my watch, anything I'm wearing to keep from pulling at the records. We found is all of the Northern Hemisphere cyclone tracks from January of 1983, and that's super random. It just happens to be the top one here, and they've actually signed who created that. But this would have been created by some researcher who was looking at satellite imagery and also analyzing.
Like tracking maybe the center of the low?
That's exactly what you see. Yep,
Yeah.
All the way around from establishment all the way up to dissipation. So this particular storm formed, well west of California coast, apparently came right up along the northwest coast and came inland over British Columbia and then dissipated over the Canadian Rockies. For some, it's therapeutic to talk about, a disaster that they lived through. For me, I think about the natural disasters that we have records of here in this building, right? The floods, the hurricanes, the the tornado outbreaks, and I think, wow, other people lived through these things, and to experience something this significant myself really puts into perspective all of the information that we steward, because it does there's a personal connection for everyone. We had been hearing that we obviously we're tracking the weather, like any good weather enthusiast. We knew the hurricane was coming. We knew that there was a frontal system approaching and that it was very slow, and it was raining for days before the hurricane made landfall. And that is I think the backstory about the significance of the flooding is that all the rain that came from Helene followed all the rain that came from this predecessor event. So knowing that, and then hearing the Weather Service reports to prepare for the worst, and it turned out to be quite accurate and right on point. But when the worst that's ever happened here is exceeded by what happened, it makes you think, well, what does this mean, right? If you're expecting the worst and preparing for the worst, and I think of folks that were in the flood zones, and I hear stories of folks who live by a creek, and they can point down, they can say, my family's been here 3 or 4 generations, the creek has only ever come up to there. We're prepared for that. That was the worst. Now, there's a new worst, and people really can, kind of get a feel for what could really happen as a result of an event like this. That's one of a kind. It's something no one has ever experienced, and no one knows anyone in this area who's ever experienced that. For me, we went to bed that previous night. The wind had picked up. Obviously, it had been raining a lot. We don't live near water, so we weren't particularly concerned about, a creek or a river rising to affect us. But we had minor water incursion into our basement before, so we were ready to go with a mop and maybe to replace, a rug or two or something like that. But the wind picked up overnight, and then we woke up in the morning, and I think the very morning of the storm moving toward us was the worst of the wind, and we had a tree come down on our roof. And we thought that's what it was. It was a very loud sound of an impact on the roof, and then we could hear it sliding down the back of our house, because most of the tree, it broke off when it hit the gutter and started to slide down the back of our house. And luckily, we were on the other end of the house at the time. So I went up, just not knowing what to do or how dangerous it was. I went up into the attic with a flashlight and, just looking to see if there was a hole in daylight in the attic. So that was the first impact. And then things started to die down. Of course, we weren't going outside in the wind and rain, but when the wind and rain started to let up, we went outside just to get a feel for what was happening in our own backyard, literally our own backyard. So the tree had come down, destroyed the fence. The deck was okay. So we're starting to take an inventory of, what's happened. We went down into the basement and realized it was not a puddle. It was 4 inches across the entire finished basement, and started to think about the things that we were losing. We had no TV, we had no internet. We had no way to know that our family from outside of town was calling frantically, trying to find out if we were okay, because they were getting much more information about the impacts to the area than we even knew existed. So they were justifiably freaking out. I have a son that lives a couple miles away from home, and he was able to call me. Of all the people that were able to get through, my son from a couple miles away, he says, "Dad, I was about to drive over there, but I had to turn around because a tree was down." And so he couldn't get to us in person either. So once he heard from us, he was able to call out to one family member outside of town who was able to relay the information that we were okay. We were in the house without power for a few days from that Friday through Sunday afternoon, and we decided to leave to go to my in-laws' house in the central part of North Carolina. And we were there for 3 days to do some of the things that you would expect, to get gas. We hit a grocery store and a big box store to get some of the provisions, knowing that we were going to go back into an environment in which that was not available, right? You couldn't get cash, you couldn't get gas. Grocery stores were closed for the most part. Just so anything that was sparse and scarce. But we saw other people doing the same thing, and this was in Salisbury. So we're, 130, 140 miles removed from Asheville, and those places were still feeling the impacts of folks that were searching for, the things that they needed. It's been interesting to me commuting to work daily for the last 6 months or so, and something that I'm compelled to do is to send a text or call my spouse or my family and just say, "Hey, the McDonald's is back open in Biltmore Village," or "Wow, they just tore down the Moe's, the Moe's restaurant because, it looks like they're not going to build that back," or, just seeing things come back very slowly and wondering. I drive through Biltmore Village every day, and to have seen the video, and everyone has seen the videos of Biltmore Village, and I can name the buildings, but everyone has seen Biltmore Village and knows the story of that area. And just to know now that businesses are trying to come back, and what does it look like for that community when there's an area that normally in the past has had 30 or 40 businesses, and there's 9 now. So what is the critical mass to where that area can thrive again, where people can go to Biltmore Village and the River Arts District and Swannanoa and all these communities that were significantly impacted, and know that it's back to a point at which it can thrive again. And just, again, driving just daily to work and seeing the comeback and knowing how long it's taken has been inspiring, because there's folks that are working really hard, to bring back the pride and just everything that Asheville is and has been.
My name is Jared Rennie. I am a physical scientist here at NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information. So right after Helene came through, I actually was in a parking lot in West Asheville, and it is awkward because I'm one of the people that analyzes floods. So I went to my flood team and I said, well, I guess we have something to look at. So that was a big inspiration for us. We really wanted to tell the story about using flood data. So it's been about 9-10 months of work to produce this story map. I mean, a lot of the big things we learned was, one, with the rainfall estimates that had happened over that 4-day period, we had about 2,500 square miles of western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, and other parts of Virginia and Tennessee experience a 1 in 1,000 rainfall event, meaning that in any given year, the chance of that type of rain is pretty low. It's not zero, but pretty darn low. We started initially with the flooding data and the rain data that we have archived here, but then we spread it out a little bit to, what was the meteorology behind the event. So we looked at sort of the upper air patterns, the surface patterns. We figured out that there was, rainfall before Helene even came here, which was a term that I actually learned or hadn't heard of for a long time, which was a predecessor rainfall event, where basically you have a lot of rain before rain from the hurricane.
This is a storm you're doing analysis on in your own backyard. How is that different for you emotionally as you were going through it, based on or compared to anything you had done before?
It was hard. It was certainly hard because as a meteorologist, as a climatologist, as a physical scientist, our job here is to look back on events that had happened, not just here in North Carolina, but across the U.S. and world. And unfortunately, there are a lot of disasters out there that lots of bad things happen. People perish. There's a lot of damage. People's lives are uprooted, and it can be hard just seeing that. But it was pretty personal seeing it here. I personally didn't have any, I personally didn't know anybody that lost their lives, but we knew friends of friends, and that had lost their homes, lost a loved one, lost a pet. So it was hard looking at the data and seeing that. But for me, in the end, it's very to talk about it. And we're about at the 1-year anniversary, and I feel that it's really good to talk about it. And the story map, I do think, does a good job at telling the story, but from both a weather perspective, but also a personal perspective. I mean, a lot of the big things we learned was, one, with the rainfall estimates that had happened over that 4-day period, we had about 2,500 square miles of western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, and other parts of Virginia and Tennessee experience a 1 in 1,000 rainfall event, meaning that in any given year, the chance of that type of rain is pretty low. It's not zero, but pretty darn low.
Feels like there's something really meta about, everyone is trying to, after the storm, I imagine, not only gather supplies, but also maybe do some work from wherever they are, right? They might be working remotely. You mentioned you were in your car checking email. Well, your job feels like you're analyzing this event, but this event is also like all around you. Mm-hmm. How would you describe that experience where you are analyzing this dramatic event that at the same time you're also living through?
It was weird. It really was weird. And at some days it was like I can just focus on the work, just focus on looking at the data set, looking at analyzing stuff. And we do other work here too at NCEI. There's different priorities that come in. So, we can kind of, to some extent, distract ourselves from other events that are going on across the country. But then when we came back to the Asheville story, it was weird. It was weird seeing, for example, a river gauge that, exceeded levels, 10 feet above its previous record that was set in 2004. And I have a colleague that lives right near that river gauge, and their first floor was basically inundated with water. So it's weird in the end, because we're professionals. We look at the science and we look at the data, but at the same time, that data was affecting us. So this is Saturday, September 28th. I was fortunate enough to find out that I was able to get out. We had 3 ways of sort of getting out of our neighborhood, but 2 of them were obscured by trees. And I was kind of naive too, because I initially thought, well, Greenville, South Carolina, which is about an hour south of here, they only got wind damage. So I figured, well, let's go down there. And we didn't have power, we didn't have water, we didn't have service. I'm like, so we don't even know what's happening. So we went down to Greenville to see, let's just get some stuff. I had supplies for 2 to 3 days. Maybe I could get more. Maybe I could get some cash. Maybe I could get some more gas. And we get down to Greenville. That's one of the first places we got reception. And once we got reception, my wife, who's sitting next to me, she starts crying because she now knows what's going on in Western North Carolina. So I had to go down to South Carolina to find out what was happening in North Carolina. And I got the sense of, okay, now this is a disaster. We have to figure stuff out. And I call my family, which is up in New England, and they're like, this is on the national news. This is a tragedy. And I was like, okay, so let's go find a place in Greenville. Greenville also had problems because they had a lot of wind and tree damage. So they had no power. They had long lines for food and ATM and groceries, and they were cash only. So being the GIS map nerd in my head, I was like, well, let's just find Interstate 85, and let's go up Interstate 85 as far as we can and find the first town that had, stuff to get. And in my mind, I was like, I'll go as far as Raleigh, Petersburg. I'll go up to DC. I have family in DC. I'll go all the way up there if I have to. And it turned out I didn't have to go that far. It was Charlotte. I ended up actually in Gastonia. And I went in there, and it wasn't that busy. It was Saturday afternoon. College football was happening. And I just got as much stuff as I could, and then we drove back to Asheville. Okay, so first, I am not an operational forecaster. That's not my job. When people ask me what the forecast is going to be, I say, I have no idea. Go to your local weather service office or local TV station. The weather service forecast office that's down in Greer, they did a phenomenal job with this forecast. They did a really great job analyzing what the impacts were going to be and when they were going to be. They worked with emergency managers, and they issued a public information statement that was so important that it got sent out as a NOAA press release, which is very rare. So they did a really great job, and they deserve all the credit they should get. The second thing is we are at a year out, and for me, it's very therapeutic to tell the story. But now, while I was not horribly affected, every issue that I've had to deal with was a minor inconvenience. But we're a year out, and there are people still trying to recover from this. And the folks of not just Western North Carolina, but also Southern Appalachia, so that includes upstate South Carolina, East Tennessee, even Eastern Kentucky. We've had all these different flood events in 2025. And people being affected by this. So I like to tell folks, like, we're still here and we're still being affected even a year later, and don't forget about them. I am very fortunate that we have all this data here at not just NCEI, but NOAA and the whole scientific enterprise. We have so much, and not just flooding data, we have all the meteorology data, all the world's weather data gets archived here. So it's basically just a sandbox for me to go and play with this data. And I'm so fortunate that we have all these cool tools that are out, including some new ones that just got released. The National Weather Service just issued a new flood inundation mapping model, which is pretty cool. And they have a new API to get a lot of the river gauge information. And we actually used a lot of that for our story map. We're so fortunate that this information is out there and publicly available so that we can use that to tell the story.